Welcome to the Fair Political Practices Commission's video for campaign filing officers. Throughout this presentation, we will refer to the Fair Political Practices Commission as the FPPC. The information provided in this presentation is taken from the Political Reform Act, FPPC regulations, advice letters, and fact sheets. Advice can be very fact-specific. Campaign filing officers should not rely on this presentation alone for assistance. It is important to familiarize yourself with the campaign manuals, forms, fact sheets, filing schedules, and the FPPC website. If you find that you have questions following the presentation, please send them to advice@fppc.ca.gov or call our advice line 866-275-3772. Before we go over your duties as a filing officer, I'd like to give you a brief history about the FPPC. In 1974, California passed Proposition 9, known today as the Political Reform Act. The act requires detailed reporting of campaign finance and lobbying activity. It also requires public officials and candidates for elective office to disclose their economic interests that may be affected by their decision-making. The Act created the FPPC to administer and enforce these laws and inform and assist in the compliance of these laws for the affected campaigns, public servants, and filing officers. During this presentation, we will discuss your duties as filing officers, different types of committees, the importance of filing schedules, campaign statements, the importance of statement logs, the statement review process, public access requirements, how long statements need to be retained, how to identify and handle non-filers, what's required after an election, and we will briefly go over the FPPC website. Here is a list of your duties as a filing officer. You are required to supply committees with current forms and manuals, which you may do so by linking to our website, review every campaign statement you receive, update your statement log to make sure it is current and make sure candidates and committees have filed the required statements, request and accept amendments from filers, notify those who have failed to file on time and assess or waive late fines if necessary, refer non-filers to the FPPC's Enforcement Division if they have not filed after your second written notification, and also provide the public with access to all filed statements. The various types of committees you will interact with can be categorized into two groups: those that receive funds, called recipient committees, and those which do not, called non-recipient committees. Recipient committee types include candidate-controlled committees, which receive contributions to support the controlling candidate's election, general-purpose committees, which receive contributions to support or oppose multiple candidates and/or ballot measures, and primarily formed committees. Primarily formed committees consist of ballot measure committees, which receive contributions to support or oppose one or more ballot measures being voted on in the same election, and primarily formed candidate committees, which receive contributions to support or oppose a candidate or a group of local candidates being voted on in the same election. These committees are not controlled by the candidate or candidates being supported. Major donor and independent expenditure committees are categorized as non-recipient committees because they do not receive contributions. Major donor committees are donors, such as individuals or businesses, that contribute $10,000 or more in a calendar year to candidates and committees. Independent expenditure committees, without coordinating with the affected candidate or measure committee, make expenditures totaling $1,000 or more in a calendar year for communications that expressly advocate support or opposition of the candidate or measure. This chart is a snapshot of the most common forms generally used by the various committees. Under certain circumstances, a candidate committee may be required to file Forms 462 and 496. For example, if committee funds are used to make an independent expenditure of $1,000 or more for or against a ballot measure, both forms are required. A non-qualified candidate raises and spends less than $2,000. These are the most commonly filed forms by candidate-controlled committees. In addition to the required campaign reports, all candidates for elective office must file Form 700. We will discuss each of these forms in detail later in the presentation. These are the common forms filed by general purpose and primarily formed committees. Form 425 or Form 450 may be filed instead of the Form 460 by general purpose and primarily formed committees that have little or no activity in a reporting period. Please note that candidate-controlled committees may not use the Form 425 or Form 450. All committees file Form 462, the verification of independent expenditures, with the FPPC only. These are the common forms used by independent expenditure and major donor committees. Because they are non-recipient committees, meaning they do not receive contributions, they do not file the Form 410 Statement of Organization. This is a partial filing schedule for the November 8, 2016 election. Filing schedules are a snapshot of who must file, what forms they must file, and when they need to file them. Along with the campaign manuals, filing schedules are one of the most valuable resources for committees and filing officers. There are separate filing schedules for each type of committee, as different committees have different filing requirements. Filing schedules for the most common election dates, such as June and November of even-numbered years, can be found on our website. We can create filing schedules for special elections in local jurisdictions. If you have an election that will be held on a date other than those available on the FPPC website, we can create a filing schedule for you. As soon as the election is called, please send us a request that includes the listed requirements. Please note that it can take up to 2 weeks to create the filing schedule, so please plan accordingly. Your statement log will help you determine if committees have filed their required statements. In order for your log to be the most effective, we recommend that it include at least the following fields: name and address of the candidate or committee, office that is held or being sought, the ballot measure number, committee ID number, type of statement required, period covered by the statement, and the due date and date filed. If your agency does not have a logging system in place, start one immediately using your agency's most current filers and working backward. Just like campaign statements, the log is a public document and must be both retained for a specific period of time and made available to the public without restriction. Because it is a public document, we recommend that you do not include personal information on the log, such as home addresses. The Political Reform Act requires you to maintain a log. However, it doesn't specify the format or information it should include. You can create your own process, but an electronic system will likely be the most efficient. It's important that the log stays up to date and that you and your staff make it available to the public upon request. All candidates must file a Candidate Form 700 by the Declaration of Candidacy filing deadline. Incumbents running for re-election must also file candidate statements unless they have filed an assuming office or annual statement within 60 days of filing the declaration of candidacy. Remember to forward candidate statements for mayors, city council members, board of supervisors, and district attorneys to the FPPC. If your county or city treasurer or your city attorney is elected, these candidate statements must also be forwarded to the FPPC. Form 501 must be filed by all candidates running for office, including incumbents running for re-election, before they raise or spend any funds. Form 501 is not required if no contributions will be solicited or received, and the candidate does not spend personal funds other than for filing and ballot statement fees. Candidates who do not plan to raise or spend $2,000 or more in the calendar year and do not have an open committee may file Form 470 in lieu of filing the full campaign statement Form 460. Candidates being voted on in the first 6 months of a calendar year file Form 470 by the first pre-election deadline. Candidates being voted on in the last 6 months file by July 31st unless they have not received contributions or made expenditures by June 30th. In that case, they file by the first pre-election deadline. Office holders with no open committee also file Form 470 by July 31st of non-election years. If a candidate believes he or she may meet or exceed the $2,000 committee qualification threshold, we recommend filing the Form 460 instead of the Form 470. If a candidate files a Form 470 and later in that calendar year receives contributions totaling $2,000 or more, or makes expenditures totaling $2,000 or more, the candidate must complete a Form 470 supplement. The Form 470 supplement must be filed within 48 hours of reaching the $2,000 committee qualification threshold. The form is sent to the Secretary of State's office, the City Clerk or County Elections Office for local candidates, and each candidate seeking the same office. The notice must be sent by email, fax, guaranteed overnight delivery, or personal delivery. Regular mail may not be used. The candidate must also file the Form 410, which we will discuss on the next slide. Recipient committees file Form 410 to register their committees and to obtain a committee ID number. Generally, committees must file Form 410 within 10 days of qualifying, meaning that they have raised or spent $2,000 or more for political purposes. However, committees that qualify within 16 days of the election must file the Form 410 within 24 hours. All committees, both state and local, must file the original Form 410 with the Secretary of State. Local committees will also file a copy of the Form 410 with their local filing official. Upon receipt of the committee's correctly completed Form 410, the Secretary of State will assign a committee ID number, post it to their website, and mail it to the committee. To locate a committee's ID number, go to www.cal-access.sos.ca.gov and enter the candidate's last name or a portion of the committee's name in the search field and click on Go. Committees will include the committee ID number on all campaign forms. During the 90 days before the election or on the date of the election, Form 496 must be filed within 24 hours of a committee making independent expenditures totaling $1,000 or more to support or oppose a candidate or ballot measure. The Form 496 is filed with the elections official of the affected candidate or measure. There are no deadline extensions for filing the Form 496. The Form 497 must be filed within 24 hours of a committee making or receiving contributions totaling $1,000 or more. The Form 497 is filed with the committee's filing officer. If the deadline falls on a weekend or state holiday, the form may be filed on the next business day unless it's the weekend before an election. This slide discusses the difference between an independent expenditure and a contribution in relation to a payment made by a third party for a communication that advocates support for or opposition of a candidate or ballot measure. When an individual, business entity, or committee pays for a communication, such as a yard sign, door hanger, or television ad, that supports or opposes a candidate or ballot measure without any consultation or coordination with the candidate or ballot measure committee, it is an independent expenditure. But if the entity paying for the communication coordinates the information, distribution, etc. with the candidate or ballot measure committee, it is reported as a non-monetary contribution by the candidates or measures committee. Form 460 is the main campaign report used to disclose a committee's activity during a specific statement period. All of the committee's contributions received and expenditures made are reported on the Form 460. It is used to file pre-election, quarterly, semi-annual, and termination statements, along with special odd-year reports and amendments made to previously filed statements. The following committees file Form 460: candidate-controlled committees, primarily formed ballot measure committees, committees primarily formed to support or oppose a candidate, and general-purpose committees. Primarily formed and general-purpose committees with little or no activity may be eligible to file Form 450 or 425 instead of the Form 460. Candidate-controlled committees, however, may not use Form 450 or 425. Deadlines vary depending on the type of committee. Please consult the committee's specific filing schedule for deadlines. Filing officers are required to review all original campaign statements to determine if they are complete. You are looking for things such as whether the cover page includes the name and address of the filer, the period covered and type of statement are correct, and that the summary page is completed sufficiently. The specific requirements are set out in Regulation 18110. There is a review guide, amendment request form on our website under Campaign Filing Officer Duties, which you should utilize as a reviewing tool. You are not required to seek or obtain information to verify entries, examine previously filed statements, or check calculations on the statements. Form 460 has several schedules, all used to report specific activity. Because some schedules are not commonly used by local committees, we will only be going over the cover page, summary page, and schedules A, B, C, E, and I. The cover page of the Form 460 should be reviewed to ensure it contains the following information as it appears on the Form 410: the committee's name, street address, and phone number, the treasurer's name, address, and phone number, and the period covered and type of statement. You should also ensure that all statements have been signed and dated by the responsible people, that they are legible, are printed in ink, and that readable reproductions can be made. This is the Form 460 summary page. Every line should have an entry in columns A and B. If there is nothing to report, there should be a 0, a dash, or an A. Compare the entries in column A with the associated schedule to make sure that the numbers that have been carried over to the summary page are accurate. You do not need to check the math. However, if you see a glaring error, you should mention it to the candidate or treasurer. Columns A and B start out with a 0 balance each calendar year, except for lines 2, 7, and 9. Loans and accrued expenses are carried forward every year until they are completely repaid. The right-hand side of the form is for state candidates only. Schedule A is used to disclose monetary contributions. For some quick tips, remember, if the contribution is from a committee, the committee's ID number must be provided. the occupation and employer box must be completed for contributions from individuals. Line 2 is where the committee reports all contributions under $100 as a lump sum. Business addresses are okay, however P.O. boxes cannot be accepted. The cumulative to date column must include all contributions, including non-monetary contributions reported on Schedule C, and loans received reported on Schedule B. The per election to date column is generally only required for state candidates. If you see any errors, you should request an amendment. Committees must disclose the name and street address for each contributor of $100 or more, and if the contributor is an individual, their occupation and employer must also be disclosed. Occupation and employer information is not required for businesses, PACs, and other candidate committees. The left column of this slide shows correct donor information. The right column shows incorrect donor information. For example, a committee may not simply list owner. They must also include the name of the business the individual owns. If a filer does not have the occupation and employer information, they have 60 days to obtain it. If the donor information is not obtained within 60 days, the contribution must be returned. If you see any incomplete information, you need to request an amendment. Schedule B is for reporting loans received, with each loan being reported on a separate line. There should be an entry in each space, even if it is just a 0, a dash, or NA. Loans are reported until they are repaid, even if there is no activity in a particular reporting period. Make sure that multiple loans from the same source are reported separately. Loans should not be lumped together during subsequent reporting periods. A loan from a commercial lending institution received in the normal course of business is reported on Schedule B, but is not considered a contribution. Contributor codes and cumulative amounts reported in column G are required only for loans that are contributions. A common mistake for novice candidates and treasurers is to also report loan repayments on Schedule E. If reported in this manner, the statement will not balance and an amendment will need to be filed. Loan repayments should be reported on Schedule B only. If a loan is forgiven, in whole or in part, the amount is reported on Schedule A as a monetary contribution. Schedule C is for non-monetary contributions, which are also referred to as in-kind contributions. Examples of non-monetary contributions could include items donated for a fundraiser, or a third party paying a vendor directly for a candidate or committee's advertisement. Just like with monetary contributions, contributors of $100 or more must be itemized, including the occupation and employer information for individual contributors. The cumulative to-date amount includes monetary contributions and loans reported on Schedules A and B received from the same source in the same calendar year. The per election to date column is generally only required for state candidates. Schedule E is used to report expenditures made during the reporting period. The committee must report the name and address of the payee and provide either a code or a description of the payment and the amount. Filers are not required to use a code if they provide a description. Make sure the committee ID number is included if a contribution is made to another committee. This is a continuation of Schedule E. This sample identifies subvendors. In this situation, the committee paid Floyd Lawson, a campaign consultant, $1,400, and Floyd Lawson paid Voter Systems and Howard Printing for the committee's project. Committees must report such subvendors when $500 or more is paid to the vendor. As you can see, these payments made by Floyd Lawson do not add up to $1,400. The remainder is either consulting fees owed to Floyd Lawson or payments to vendors who received less than $500. Alternatively, subvendors may be reported on Schedule G. Without reporting subvendors, the public does not know where the money was actually spent. For payments charged on a credit card, the reporting threshold is $100, not $500. Note that candidates may be reimbursed for filing fees paid from personal funds, and that the expense is reported on Schedule E, as shown in the last entry. Schedule I is used to report miscellaneous increases to cash, which are payments received by a committee that are not contributions. Examples include refunds, bank interest, and proceeds from items sold at an auction. Filed statements are considered public record and must be made available to the public no later than the second business day following the day you received the statement, and must be made available to the public during normal business hours. You may not require a request form, identification, or a Public Records Act request from the requester. The law also states that you may not charge more than 10 cents per page for copies. However, you may charge a $5 fee per request for statements more than 5 years old. Another very important point is that you may not redact any information on hard copies of statements you provide to the public. These are the required retention periods for campaign statements. High-ranking officials' campaign statements must be kept indefinitely. If you have electronic filing, electronically filed statements must be kept for 10 years. Original campaign statements for other candidates and committees, such as school board candidates and ballot measure committees, must be kept for 7 years. Original statements for defeated, non-incumbent candidates must be kept for 5 years. Copies of statements filed with you are kept for 4 years. For example, the Form 410, since the originals are filed with the Secretary of State. After 2 years, you may retain the statements on a space-saving device, such as scanning statements and saving them on your local network. You may keep the statements longer if you wish, but those statements remain public record and must be available to the public upon request. Use your log to determine whether a statement has been filed. It is your duty to notify all committees that have failed to file on time. You may notify non-filers by telephone, mail, email, or in person. But before referring a non-filer to the FPPC's Enforcement Division, we ask that you send 2 written notifications. If you still have not received the statement after the second written notification, refer the matter to the FPPC's Enforcement Division. There is a link to the Enforcement Electronic Complaint System on our website. Following up on non-filers is an important duty. Timely filed campaign statements are vital to ensure that voters know all of the facts necessary to make an educated decision when casting their vote. Any person who files a campaign statement after the deadline is liable for a late fine. There are no provisions in the Act for granting extensions of the filing deadlines. However, you may waive a late fine. You may not assess a fine until a statement has been filed because you cannot calculate the amount of the fine until you know how many days late the statement is filed. The fine starts on the day after the filing deadline. It is not based on the day you notify the candidate or committee. The maximum fine is $10 per late day. Also, the fine may not exceed the amount of the committee's receipts or expenditures, lines 5 and 11 of the summary page, whichever is more. If the receipts and expenditures are less than $100, the fine cannot exceed $100. Form 470 filers may not be fined more than $100. We strongly recommend that all agencies have written guidelines for late fines so that fines are assessed and waived in an impartial manner. After the election, further filing requirements for candidates can depend on whether they were elected or not. Successful and defeated Form 460 filers will continue to file the Form 460 semi-annually until their committee is terminated. Successful Form 470 filers must file Form 470 by July 31st each year, but are not required to if the salary that they receive is less than $200 per month. Defeated Form 470 filers, no further statements are required. Successful candidates may continue to receive contributions and use the funds for officeholder expenses unless there is a local ordinance that prohibits it. Please recommend that defeated candidates carefully review the campaign manual or call the FPPC for guidance to avoid having their remaining funds become surplus, as once that happens, they cannot use them for a future election. General-purpose committees and committees primarily formed to support or oppose a ballot measure or candidate must continue to file at least semi-annually. Committees with little or no activity may be eligible to file the Form 450 or 425 instead of the Form 460. For these types of committees, leftover funds do not become surplus. Major donors and independent expenditure committees are both non-recipient committees and requalify each year. These are the criteria for terminating a recipient committee. Committees may terminate with outstanding debt. In doing so, they are declaring that they do not have the ability to discharge debts, loans, or other obligations. Major donor and independent expenditure committees do not file termination forms. They terminate automatically at the end of each calendar year. The electronic filing of campaign statements is a great tool that promotes efficiency. Local agencies may adopt an ordinance to approve the use of an e-filing system if the standards outlined in this slide are met. See Government Code Section 84615 for information. Again, that's Government Code Section 84615. The FPPC website contains many helpful tools and resources. The links you will find most helpful are pointed out by the red arrows in this slide, which shows our homepage at www.fppc.ca.gov. If you click on Campaign Rules, you will find the campaign forms and manuals and several campaign-related fact sheets. Click on Guidance for Filing Officers for sample non-filer notifications, the Form Retention Schedule, the Form 460 Review Guide, and a lot of other information to help you perform your duties as a filing officer. If you need assistance in locating information on our website, please give us a call. We will be happy to assist you. We want to thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. There are many ways to reach the FPPC. Call our toll-free advice line at 866-275-3772 Monday through Thursday from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. to speak directly with a consultant, or email your questions to advice@fppc.ca.gov. You can also visit our website, our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter. Thank you.